I'm Beatrice Turner, 78 years old, a woman, and at my granddaughter's engagement party, my own daughter gifted her the business I spent a lifetime building, right out from under me. The weight of a legacy is a funny thing. You carry it for so long, it becomes part of your bones, your sinew, the very rhythm of your breathing. For 50 years, my legacy smelled like yeast rolls rising in a warm kitchen, like slow-simmered collard greens seasoned with smoked turkey, like the sharp, sweet tang of my secret ingredient barbecue sauce. My legacy was Beatrice's Table, a catering business I had started with nothing but a book of my mother's recipes, 10 calloused fingers, and a prayer. I had built it into something the whole city knew, a name synonymous with good food, with comfort, with home. And I had built it, I thought, for them. For my daughter, Rachel, and her daughter, my granddaughter, Chloe. Looking back, the signs were always there, like faint cracks in a beautiful porcelain vase. You don't notice them at first, or perhaps you choose not to, because you love the vase so much you can't bear the thought of it being flawed. I remember Chloe's 16th birthday like it was yesterday. We were in a department store, the kind with floors so polished you can see your own worried reflection in them. Chloe, already tall and elegant at that age, had her eyes fixed on a leather handbag that cost more than my first oven. She didn't look at it with longing, she looked at it with expectation. "I just have to have it, Mom," she'd said, her voice smooth as cream. Rachel, my daughter, had sighed, a put-upon sound she had perfected over the years. "Chloe, baby, that's a little steep." I stepped in, my own sensible purse clutched in my hand. "Chloe, honey, that's not a little steep, that's a mountain. What's wrong with the lovely bag we saw earlier?" Chloe's face, a mirror of her mother's, clouded over instantly. The smile vanished, replaced by a sullen pout that could curdle milk. "Grandma, you don't get it. This isn't just a bag, it's an investment. It's about building a brand." A brand at 16, I had been canning peaches and learning to stretch a dollar until it screamed at her age. But Rachel, ever the mediator for Chloe's desires, placed a placating hand on my arm. "Mom, it's a different world now. You have to look the part to get ahead. She has to project success." Rachel bought her the bag. She paid for it with the credit card I had co-signed for her years ago, the one meant for business emergencies. I watched them walk away, Chloe swinging the expensive leather like a trophy, and I felt the first faint tremor of unease. My daughter wasn't just spoiling her child, she was teaching her that the appearance of success was more valuable than the hard work it took to achieve it. She was teaching her that wanting something was the same as deserving it. Then there was the matter of the business itself. As Beatrice's table grew, so did Rachel's involvement, at least on paper. She had a knack for marketing, I'll give her that. She designed beautiful brochures and talked a good game with corporate clients. But she never once set foot in the kitchen before dawn. She never felt the sting of hot oil on her forearm or the deep, aching exhaustion in her back after a 16-hour day serving a wedding. About 10 years ago, she came to me with a sheaf of papers. "Mom," she'd said, her voice earnest, "we need to protect ourselves. We need to become an LLC, a limited liability company. It separates your personal assets from the business. It's just smart." It sounded sensible. I was in my late 60s then, and the world of legal jargon was a foreign country to me. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? She was my daughter. We sat at my kitchen table, the very one where I'd first sketched out my business plan on a napkin, and I signed where she told me to sign. I became the majority owner, she the minority partner. It felt right, a bridge to the future, a way of ensuring that what I had built would one day pass to her and then to Chloe. I saw it as a promise. I realize now she saw it as a stepping stone. Rachel always spoke of my work with a strange kind of affectionate condescension. At family gatherings, she'd say things like, "Mom's food is just so authentic, it's got so much soul." She made it sound like I was a quaint hobbyist, a rustic novelty, not a businesswoman who had single-handedly negotiated contracts, managed payroll, and built a reputation that restaurateurs envied. She loved the fruits of my labor, the beautiful home it paid for, the private schools it sent Chloe to, the prestige it brought the family name. But the labor itself, that was just Grandma's thing, something I did with my hands. It was as if the sweat and the struggle were an embarrassing secret, best kept in the kitchen while she and Chloe enjoyed the party in the dining room. The final crack in the vase appeared about a year ago. Major Magazine wanted to do a feature story on Beatrice's Table. They called it a pillar of the community, a story of Black entrepreneurship and legacy. I was overjoyed. I spent a week polishing my silver, pressing my best linens, preparing for the interview and photo shoot. The day before the reporter was due to arrive, Rochelle called me. "Mom, I have some great news," she said. "I've managed to convince the magazine to focus the story on the future of the brand, on the transition to the next generation. They're going to interview me and Chloe." My heart sank, but Rochelle, it's my story, it's Beatrice's table. "And you'll be in it, of course," she'd chirped. "They'll get a lovely photo of you, but this is a bigger opportunity. It's about showing that the legacy is secure. It makes for a better story arc." I was demoted to a supporting role in the story of my own life. I ended up as a single, grainy photograph on the second page captioned Founder Beatrice Turner. The main spread was a glossy photo of Rochelle and Chloe looking poised and powerful, talking about their vision for expansion. I read the article and the words blurred through my tears. They spoke of honoring the foundation I had laid while making it relevant for a new era. They made me sound like a museum piece, a relic. I should have fought back then, I should have screamed. But I didn't, because I am a woman of a certain generation, a generation that was taught to keep the peace in the family at all costs. You don't air your dirty laundry, you smile, you endure, and you pray that love will eventually smooth over the cracks. You believe with a faith as deep and abiding as your love for God that your family will ultimately do right by you. It was the single greatest mistake of my life. The invitation to Chloe's engagement party arrived in a cream-colored envelope so thick it felt like it was hiding a state secret. It was embossed with gold filigree, and the calligraphy was so ornate it took me a moment to decipher my own name. The party was to be held at the Oakwood Grand, a hotel where a single room for one night cost what I used to make in a month. It was, in every sense of the word, Rochelle's production. My daughter had always been a master of staging. She knew how to create an illusion, how to make everything look perfect, even when it was rotting from the inside. For 2 weeks leading up to the event, my phone rang constantly. It was always Rochelle, her voice a whirlwind of frantic energy. "Mom, can you handle the canapes? Just your signature mini crab cakes and the sweet potato biscuits. The hotel catering is doing the main course, but we need your touch for the cocktail hour." And then a day later, "Mom, I know it's last minute, but Chloe's fiancé, bless his heart, his family is from Louisiana and they're just dying to try your gumbo. Could you whip up a small pot, a symbolic pot?" Each request was a little thorn wrapped in the velvet of a compliment. She wasn't asking her business partner for help. She was asking her mother, her prop, to provide the folksy, authentic window dressing for her grand affair, and like a fool, I agreed. I spent the week before the party in my kitchen, the place that had always been my sanctuary but now felt like a high-end sweatshop. I rolled out dough for 100 biscuits, deveined shrimp until my fingers were raw, stirred the dark, fragrant roux for the gumbo, my own reflection rippling in the pot. I was tired. A deep, bone-weary tired that had little to do with my 78 years and everything to do with the slow, creeping sense of being used. But still, I held on to hope. This was Chloe's engagement, a milestone. Family was supposed to rally. I told myself that Rochelle was just stressed, that she wanted everything to be perfect for her only daughter. I packed the food into insulated carriers myself, loaded it into my old but reliable station wagon, and drove to the Oakwood Grand, telling myself that tonight would be a night of joy. The ballroom was breathtaking, I had to admit. The chandeliers dripped with crystals like frozen tears, and the tables were swathed in gold linens. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Rochelle, draped in a shimmering navy gown, floated through the room like a queen in her court. She kissed my cheek when I arrived, the air around her smelling of expensive perfume and ambition. "Mom, you look wonderful," she said, her eyes flicking over my simple but elegant dress. It was a look I knew well. It meant, "You are presentable, you will not embarrass me." "Everything looks beautiful, Rochelle," I said, and I meant it. "Of course it is," she whispered, squeezing my arm, "only the best for my Chloe." Chloe herself was a vision in white, a dress that was more befitting a wedding than an engagement party. She was holding court by the towering, seven-tiered cake, laughing with her fiancé, a handsome but weak-chinned young man named Gregory. She saw me and waved, a flick of the wrist that was both a greeting and a summons. I made my way through the crowd of strangers, all of them dressed in their finest, their voices a low, privileged hum. These were not our people. These were not the church deacons, the neighborhood friends, the loyal customers who had supported me for decades. These were Gregory's people, Rachel's aspirations. Grandma, you made it, Chloe said, giving me an air kiss that didn't dare smudge her lipstick. Everyone is raving about your biscuits, raving. I'm glad they're enjoying them, honey, I said, my heart swelling just a little. That was all it ever took for me, a crumb of appreciation. The first hour passed in a blur of handshakes and polite smiles. I watched as my food was devoured by people who had no idea of the love and labor that went into it. They were just tiny, tasty obstacles on the way to the open bar. Rochelle kept the evening moving on a tight schedule. There were toasts from the best man, the maid of honor, the father of the groom. And then Rochelle took the microphone, a triumphant smile on her face. The string quartet fell silent. A hush fell over the room. Good evening, everyone, she began, her voice resonating with practiced confidence. Thank you all for being here to celebrate this incredible moment for my daughter, Chloe, and our wonderful new son, Gregory. As a mother, you want to give your children the world. You want to give them every advantage, every opportunity to succeed. She paused, her eyes scanning the room before they landed on me. She gave me a warm, loving smile. It was a beautiful smile, a performer's smile. My own mother, Beatrice, she said, and a wave of applause rippled through the room. I felt a flush of pride. My mother taught me the meaning of hard work. From her own kitchen with her bare hands, she built an empire. Beatrice's table isn't just a business to our family, it's our heart, it's our legacy. She was laying it on thick, but the words still warmed me. She was finally giving me my due. I felt my anxieties from the past weeks begin to melt away. This was what it was all about: family legacy. And it is in that spirit of legacy, Rochelle continued, her voice swelling with emotion, that we as a family have decided to give Chloe and Gregory the ultimate wedding gift, a foundation on which they can build their own future. She gestured to a small, elegantly wrapped table nearby. Her assistant, a nervous young woman, stepped forward and pulled away the silk cloth. Underneath was a large, leather-bound portfolio. It looked official, it looked final. My stomach clenched. I didn't understand what was happening, but a cold dread began to seep into my bones, chilling me despite the warmth of the room. Chloe, honey, come here, Rochelle cooed. Chloe, her face a mask of practiced surprise, glided to her mother's side. Rochelle opened the portfolio with a flourish. To give you the head start you so richly deserve, Rochelle announced to the room. We are thrilled to announce that as of today, my daughter, Chloe Jenkins, is the new owner and CEO of Beatrice's Table. The words hung in the air, each one a perfectly polished stone thrown directly at my heart. New owner and CEO. The room erupted in applause, a deafening wave of sound that felt like a physical blow. I could see faces turning towards me, smiling, expecting to see a matriarch beaming with pride, passing the torch. But I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. My smile was frozen on my face, a brittle, cracking thing. Chloe feigned shock, her hand flying to her mouth. Oh my God, Mom, she gasped. You didn't. It was a terrible piece of acting, but the audience didn't care. They were captivated by the drama. We did, Rochelle said, wrapping an arm around Chloe, pulling her close. Your father and I and your grandma, we all agreed that it was time. You have the vision, the youth, the energy to take it to the next level. We all agreed. The lie was so audacious, so public, it stole the air from my lungs. My eyes darted around the room, searching for something to hold onto, some sign that this was a nightmare. But all I saw were the smiling faces of strangers, the glittering chandeliers, the triumphant look on my daughter's face. Rochelle held up a single document from the portfolio for everyone to see. We've been working with the lawyers for weeks to make this a seamless transition. Everything is signed, sealed, and delivered. The keys to the kingdom, my darling, all yours. The keys to the kingdom I had built. The kingdom whose floors I had scrubbed, whose ovens I had scoured, whose reputation I had forged through sleepless nights and aching joints. I finally found my voice. It was a whisper, a rustle of dry leaves. Rochelle. She heard me, but she didn't turn. She was basking in the applause in the glow of her own magnanimity. Chloe, however, glanced over at me, a flicker of something. Guilt, pity, in her eyes before it was quickly extinguished, replaced by the sheer, unadulterated thrill of possession. She had the handbag, she had the business, she had it all. The applause finally died down, and people began to surge forward to congratulate the happy couple on their engagement, on their new business. I was trapped at my table, an island in a sea of celebration. A few people, old acquaintances of mine, came over, their faces etched with a kind of confused sympathy. Beatrice, my goodness, what a surprise, one said. You're retiring then. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Retiring, was that what this was, being put out to pasture in front of 200 people? Gregory's father, a portly man with a booming voice, clapped me on the shoulder. Beatrice, you've raised one heck of a daughter to give up a jewel like that for her own child. The generosity. I just nodded, my neck stiff. The generosity. They were praising Rochelle for her generosity in giving away what was never hers to give. I had to see it. I had to see the proof of my own erasure. I stood on unsteady legs and walked toward the small table where the portfolio lay open. Chloe and Rochelle were a few feet away, accepting hugs and congratulations. No one paid me any mind. I was a ghost at my own funeral. I reached out a trembling hand and touched the thick, creamy paper of the documents. It was all there: legal forms, transfer of ownership agreements, amendments to the LLC operating agreement. My name was there at the top of the old documents. But on the new ones, the final ones, it was gone. My signature was there on a preliminary form from weeks ago, a form Rochelle had told me was a minor tax update. I had signed it in my kitchen, without my reading glasses, trusting her completely. And below it, a dozen more pages I had never seen, all culminating in a final, notarized document that declared Chloe Jenkins the sole proprietor. My name had been quietly, methodically, surgically removed. The room began to tilt. The happy chatter of the crowd faded into a dull roar, like the sound of the ocean pulling away from the shore. I looked up and my eyes met Rochelle's. For a split second, the mask fell. I saw no triumph, no joy. I saw a cold, hard calculation. She knew exactly what she had done. And in her eyes, I saw the justification. It was for the best. It was for Chloe. I felt a strange calm settle over me, the kind of calm that comes after the storm has ripped everything away and there is nothing left to lose. The pain was so immense, so total, that it transformed into something else, something hard and clear and sharp. I turned away from the table and walked through the crowd. I didn't say goodbye to anyone, I just walked. I passed the string quartet, now playing something cheerful and bright. I passed the bar where people were laughing, holding glasses of champagne. I passed the table where my crab cakes and biscuits had been, now just a few crumbs on an empty platter. I reached the grand doors of the ballroom, and for the first time I looked back. I saw my daughter, my only child, beaming under the crystal lights. I saw my granddaughter, the heir to my life's work, laughing as her fiancé kissed her. They were a perfect picture of family, of happiness, of legacy, and I was not in the picture. I smiled. It was a real smile this time, but it wasn't a happy one. It was the smile of a woman who had just realized that the vase wasn't just cracked, it had been deliberately shattered, and they had left her to clean up the pieces. Then let her start from scratch, I whispered to the empty hallway. That night I took two quiet steps. The first was a phone call, the second was a promise to myself. My name may have been removed from their documents, but they were about to learn that my name was the only thing that had ever truly mattered. The drive home from the Oakwood Grand was a blur. The city lights smeared across my windshield like paint, bright and meaningless. I don't remember the traffic. I don't remember the route I took, the familiar turns I had made 1,000 times. I was piloting my body, but my mind, my soul, was still back in that ballroom, pinned to the floor by the weight of my daughter's betrayal. When I finally pulled into my own driveway, the sight of my small, tidy house felt alien. This was the house that Beatrice's table had paid for. The garden out front, the sturdy roof over my head, the warm bed waiting for me inside. It was all built on a foundation of flour, sugar, and 50 years of sweat. And it had all been used as a stage for my public execution. I turned off the engine and just sat in the silence of the car, the keys still clutched in my hand. The quiet was a relief after the roar of the party, but it was also heavy, suffocating. It was the quiet of absence, the quiet of being utterly and completely alone. The pain came in waves, first a hot, searing anger that made me want to scream, to throw something, to drive back to that hotel and tell every one of those smiling people the truth. I imagined their shocked faces, Rochelle's horror, Chloe's humiliation. The fantasy was bitter and satisfying, but it faded quickly, leaving behind the second wave, the one that was so much worse. A grief so profound it felt like a death, because something had died in that ballroom. My faith in my own daughter, my belief in the sanctity of our family. The loving, trusting, slightly naive woman I used to be, she had died tonight. I finally forced myself out of the car and into the house. The air inside was still and smelled faintly of cinnamon and roasted garlic from my week of cooking for the party. The scent, which usually brought me such comfort, now felt like an accusation. I walked into my kitchen, my sanctuary. The stainless steel counters gleamed under the light. My collection of cast iron skillets, seasoned over decades, hung silently on the wall. This was my command center, the heart of my empire. And tonight, I had learned I was just a tenant. I sank into a chair at my kitchen table, the very table where I had signed away my life's work. I laid my head down on the cool wood, the same wood that had held my mother's flour-dusted hands, and I wept. I didn't sob or wail. It was a quiet, hopeless weeping, the kind that comes from a place so deep inside you that it makes no sound. Tears streamed down my face, dripping onto the worn grain of the table, for my business, for my daughter, but mostly for the fool I had been. How had I not seen it? How had I let my love for them blind me so completely? Every memory, every justification, every time I had swallowed my pride for the sake of peace, now seemed like a link in a chain they had been forging for years, a chain to tie me down while they ransacked my life. Rochelle's constant talk of modernizing, Chloe's casual entitlement, the way they had slowly edged me out of the narrative of my own success. It wasn't a sudden coup, it was a long, patient siege, and I had left the gates wide open. Sometime after midnight, the tears stopped. The grief remained, a cold, heavy stone in my gut, but something else was beginning to stir alongside it. It was the part of me that had faced down skeptical loan officers in the 1970s who didn't think a black woman could run a business. It was the part of me that had stayed up all night to redo an entire wedding order after a freezer failed. It was the part of me that had built something from nothing, the part of me that knew the true meaning of grit. It was a quiet, smoldering ember of indignation. They had taken my company, they had taken my trust, but they had made one catastrophic miscalculation. They had forgotten who I was. They saw a tired, 78-year-old woman, a relic to be honored and then shelved. They had forgotten the fire that had forged me. My head snapped up, my back straightened. The woman who had been weeping was gone. In her place was Beatrice Turner, founder, creator, and survivor. I had been a fool for love. I would not be a fool in defeat. I stood up and walked over to the telephone that hung on my kitchen wall, its coiled cord a relic from another time just like me. My hands were steady now. My mind was clear, sharp, and cold as ice. The time for grieving was over. The time for action had begun. I took a deep breath. This was my first quiet step. I picked up the receiver and dialed a number I knew by heart, a number I hadn't called in months, but one I knew I could count on now more than ever. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar, gravelly voice answered, thick with sleep. "Hello." "David," I said, my own voice calm and even. "It's Beatrice. I'm sorry to call so late." There was a pause and then the sound of rustling of a man sitting up in bed. "Bee, is everything all right? It's 1 in the morning." "No, David," I said, looking around my silent, empty kitchen. "Nothing is all right, but it's going to be." David Carter and I went back 55 years. He had been my late husband James's best friend, the best man at our wedding, and the rock I had leaned on when James passed away far too soon. David was a lawyer, but not the slick corporate kind that Rochelle favored. He was an old-school brawler with a mind like a steel trap and a loyalty that ran deeper than any river. He was semi-retired now, preferring to spend his days fishing, but I knew that beneath the relaxed exterior, the fighter was still there. "My God, B," he said over the phone, his voice now wide awake and sharp with concern. "Tell me what happened." And so I did. I told him everything. The party, the speech, the portfolio, the smiling faces, the crushing public humiliation of it all. I spoke without emotion, laying out the facts like a general detailing a battle plan. I recounted Rachel's words, Chloe's fake surprise, the casual cruelty of their gift. He listened without interruption, a long silence on the other end of the line. When I finished, the silence stretched on for a few more seconds. I could practically hear the gears turning in his brilliant mind. The conniving little, he started, his voice a low growl, and then he cut himself off. Beatrice, I am so sorry. I am so sorry this happened to you. Sorry doesn't fix it, David, I said, my voice hard. They think they've won. They think they have my business. They think I'm finished. Are you? He asked quietly. It wasn't a challenge. It was a genuine question. He was taking my temperature. No, I said, a fire catching in my chest. I am not finished. I want to fight. They took everything, David. The LLC, the company assets, the bank accounts. It was all in the papers. Send them to me, he said, his voice all business now. You took pictures, I hope. I did one better, I said. I slipped one of the duplicate copies of the final transfer agreement into my purse when no one was looking. A low chuckle came through the phone. That's my B, smart as a whip even when they're trying to cut your legs out from under you. Email it to me. Tonight, I'll look at it first thing in the morning. We'll meet at my office. 10 a.m., don't you worry, we'll find something. I hung up the phone, feeling a sliver of hope for the first time in hours. David's confidence was a balm to my wounded soul. This was my second quiet step, calling in my ally. The next morning, I walked into David's dusty, book-lined office. He wasn't in one of those downtown glass towers. His office was in a modest brick building in our old neighborhood, the same one he'd been in for 40 years. He stood up when he saw me, his face creased with worry, and gave me a hug that felt like coming home. A coffee, he asked. Something stronger, I replied. He poured 2 small glasses of bourbon neat and pushed one across his mahogany desk to me. To injustice, he said, raising his glass. And to fixing it, I added, clinking his glass and taking a sip. The fire of the liquor was grounding. On his desk, the document I had emailed him was printed out, covered in yellow highlighter and notes scrawled in red ink. He leaned back in his leather chair, which groaned in protest. Well, he said, Rachel's lawyers are slick, I'll give them that. The LLC transfer is ironclad. They used the preliminary authorization you signed for that tax update as a basis to push through the full transfer of ownership. It's predatory, it's immoral, but on its face, it's probably legal. They've dotted their I's and crossed their T's. The cold stone in my gut returned. So that's it, there's nothing. David held up a hand. I said it's probably legal, but slick people often think they're smarter than they are. They get arrogant, they focus on the big, shiny prize, and they miss the details. He tapped a finger on the document. They transferred the LLC. That means they get the company's tangible assets, the kitchen equipment, the delivery vans, the lease on the commercial space, the tables, the chairs, and the debt. All the outstanding invoices, the payroll, the loans, it's all Chloe's problem now. A small, grim smile touched my lips. There's a very large invoice for the new convection ovens due next week. Good, David said with a predatory grin of his own. But that's just the appetizer. The main course is much sweeter. He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. B, when we set up your business originally, long before Rachel got her claws into it, do you remember how we structured it? I thought back, it was years ago, right after James had passed. David had handled it all for me. I don't know, David, you just told me where to sign. I know, he said, and thank God you trusted me. Rachel and her high-priced lawyers focused on the LLC, the company, but the company is just a vessel, a shell. The value, B, the real value of your business isn't in the ovens and the vans. Where is it? I looked at him confused. In the food, the reputation. Exactly, and what creates the food? My recipes, I whispered. Your recipes, he confirmed, which I had you formally copyright in your own name, Beatrice Turner, 25 years ago. They are your personal intellectual property. They were never signed over to the LLC. My heart began to beat faster. And what is the reputation tied to? He pressed. My name, I said, my voice growing stronger, Beatrice's table. Exactly. He slammed his hand on the desk, making the bourbon glasses jump. A name which I, paranoid old goat that I am, convinced you to personally trademark also in your name, not the LLC's. I renewed it myself 3 years ago. It belongs to you, B, not the company, to you. I stared at him, the full implication of his words washing over me like a tidal wave. They had stolen the cage, but I still held the bird. They had the kitchen, but I had the soul. They have a company with no recipes and a name, the. Why can't legally use, I breathed, a slow, wide smile spreading across my face. Bingo, David said, leaning back with a look of profound satisfaction. They have a collection of metal and rubber and a pile of bills. They can call themselves Chloe's Catering or whatever they want, but the second they try to use the name Beatrice's Table or claim to sell your famous sweet potato pie, I will sue them into the ground for trademark and copyright infringement. They can't even put up a sign with the name on it. The plan began to form in my mind, clear and precise. The grief and the pain were still there, but now they were fuel, righteous, holy fuel. What about the website, the client list? I asked. Who is the registered owner of the domain name? Whose credit card paid for the social media manager? He asked. Mine, I said. It all comes out of my personal account. Rochelle always said it was cleaner that way. David let out a bark of a laugh. Oh, the irony is just too delicious. She played herself, B, they have nothing, they just don't know it yet. I stood up feeling 10 feet tall. I felt the weight of 78 years, but it was no longer a burden. It was a mantle of power. Thank you, David. What are you going to do? He asked, though he already knew. Rochelle said she wanted Chloe to have a fresh start, I said, my voice ringing with a newfound strength. I'm going to make sure she gets one right from scratch. That night, my house was not a place of grief. It was a war room. The calm that had settled over me was absolute. I made myself a cup of strong black tea, sat down at my kitchen table, and opened my laptop. It was time to dismantle the empire they thought they possessed. It was time for the second quiet step. My fingers, which had kneaded dough and chopped vegetables for 50 years, now moved with a different kind of purpose across the keyboard. First, the website, https://www.google.com/search q equals Beatrice's As David had confirmed, I was the registered owner. I logged into the hosting account. The homepage was a beautiful, glossy picture of Chloe and Rochelle from that cursed magazine article. The caption read, "The future of a legacy." With a few clicks, I took the entire site offline. I didn't delete it, that would be too simple. I replaced it with a single, elegant landing page. A plain white background with simple black text. It read, Beatrice's Table is currently undergoing a period of restructuring. We thank you for your loyalty over the years. A new and exciting announcement is coming soon. And at the bottom, in small print, copyright and trademark, copyright Beatrice Turner, all rights reserved. Next, social media. The Instagram account had nearly 50,000 followers. It was a vibrant gallery of my food, my story, all curated by Rochelle to project the image she wanted. The profile picture was again of her and Chloe. I logged in as the primary administrator. I methodically untagged every photo, removed every mention of Chloe or Rochelle's vision. Then I changed the password and the recovery email to my own private one. I did the same for the Facebook page and the Twitter account. In the space of 15 minutes, their primary marketing tools were silenced, locked away from them completely. The client list was next. This was the lifeblood of the business: years of weddings, corporate events, church socials, and private parties. It was all stored in a cloud-based customer relationship management software. The master login belonged to me. I exported the entire database: names, phone numbers, email addresses, event histories, personal notes about their favorite dishes into a secure encrypted file. Then I deleted the original database from the cloud. Gone. The institutional memory of Beatrice's Table now existed only on a small USB drive that I held in the palm of my hand. Finally, the recipes. These were my crown jewels. Many were stored digitally in a password-protected folder for ease of use in the commercial kitchen. But the originals, the ones handwritten by my mother and grandmother, the ones with my own notes and adjustments scribbled in the margins, were kept in a series of thick, leather-bound journals in a fireproof safe in my study. I opened the safe. The smell of old paper and ink filled the air. I ran my fingers over my mother's spidery handwriting for her buttermilk biscuit recipe. I saw my own note from 1988 next to the gumbo ingredients. A little more cayenne, James likes it hot. A pang of sadness hit me, a sharp and sudden grief for him, for the life we had built, for the legacy I thought I was protecting. These books weren't just recipes, they were my history, they were my soul. I took out every single journal. Then I went to my computer and with a final, satisfying click, I permanently deleted the digital recipe folder and wiped the backup. The only copies in existence were now sitting on my desk. By 4 a.m. it was done, I had quit. Etley and systematically removed every single intangible asset of the business. The name, the reputation, the customers, the history, and the very instructions for making the food. All that remained for Rochelle and Chloe was a hollowed-out shell. A kitchen full of equipment they didn't know how to use to cook food they didn't know how to make for customers they could no longer contact under a name they could not legally use. I made myself another cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the black sky slowly soften to a deep indigo. I felt a profound sense of peace. This wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming myself. They had tried to turn me into a footnote in my own story, but they were about to learn that I was the story. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the horizon in shades of pink and orange when my phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. It was a text message from a number I didn't have saved, but I knew exactly who it was. The time was 6:13 a.m. The message was in all caps, frantic and stripped of all the poise and elegance from the party. Grandma, where is everything? The website is gone. I can't log into Instagram. What did you do? I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. The warmth spread through my chest. I thought about my response for a long moment. I could have been cruel, I could have been dismissive, but I chose to be calm, I chose to be powerful. I typed my reply, my thumb steady. Check the delivery door. The silence that followed my text message was more satisfying than any screaming match could ever have been. I could picture the scene perfectly, Chloe frantic showing the phone to Rochelle, the dawning horror on their faces as they slowly realized the extent of their miscalculation. The frantic, useless calls to the web developer, the social media manager, all of whom would tell them the same thing: the owner has revoked your access. I spent the morning on the phone with David, finalizing our next steps. Then I called my top 2 kitchen assistants, 2 wonderful women who had been with me for over a decade, and asked them to meet me for lunch. I knew where their loyalties would lie. At precisely 2 p.m., as arranged by David, a legal courier service arrived at the commercial kitchen space of the now-defunct Beatrice's table. I wasn't there to see it, but David had a source who described the scene to me later. Rochelle and Chloe were there, pacing the floor, their faces pale with stress and lack of sleep. The courier, a stern-faced man who took his job very seriously, handed Chloe a large cardboard box. She snatched it from him and tore it open. Inside, there were 3 things. The first was a simple, large manila envelope. Inside that envelope were the physical keys to the kitchen, the key to the front door, the back door, the storeroom, the office. They were attached to a plain metal ring, no fancy fob, no branding, just the keys to an empty kingdom. The second item was a thick, heavy folder bound with a rubber band. Chloe pulled it out, her hands trembling. It contained every single outstanding bill and liability associated with the LLC she now owned. The invoice for the new convection ovens due in 3 days for $20,000, the payroll for the last 2 weeks, the rent for the building, the bill for the van's insurance. A detailed, legally binding ledger of the debt she had so proudly inherited. The third and final item was a crisp, formal letter on David Carter's legal letterhead. It was a cease and desist order. It stated in no uncertain terms that the name Beatrice's Table, the associated logos, and all marketing materials were the registered trademark and intellectual property of one Beatrice Turner. It went on to state that all recipes, menus, and food preparations created and sold under that name were the copyrighted property of Beatrice Turner. Any attempt to use the name or replicate and sell the copyrighted recipes would result in immediate legal action seeking maximum damages. According to David's source, Chloe read the letter, her eyes growing wider with each sentence. The color drained from her face. She looked at her mother, her expression one of utter disbelief and panic. Rochelle grabbed the letter and read it herself, her carefully constructed composure finally shattering. They were left standing in the middle of a state-of-the-art kitchen, surrounded by the finest equipment, with a mountain of debt and a legal order that forbade them from being the one thing they had wanted to be. They had the shells, but the soul was gone. Meanwhile, I was sitting in a cozy booth at a downtown restaurant with my two most loyal employees, Maria and Simone. I laid out my plan for them, not a big catering company, something smaller, more exclusive. A bespoke service for my most dedicated, high-end clients. We wouldn't need a huge commercial kitchen, just a smaller, more intimate. A space we would call it simply by Beatrice. Their faces lit up, they didn't hesitate for a second. "We're with you, B," Maria said, her hand covering mine. "We always were." The very next day, the announcement went out, an email sent from a new address to a very specific list of my best clients. It was simple and elegant. It announced the launch of By Beatrice, a new personal culinary experience. It told a story of returning to one's roots, of focusing on quality over quantity, of the timeless value of authenticity. My phone didn't stop ringing for a week. Old clients, relieved and overjoyed, clamored to book me for their upcoming events. The magazine that had written the feature on Rochelle and Chloe called, wanting to do an exclusive follow-up story on the shocking business split. I politely agreed. Rochelle and Chloe tried to salvage things, I heard. They tried to launch Chloe's table, but without the recipes, without the reputation, without the name, they had nothing. The food was bland, the service was disorganized. They floundered for a few months, drowning in the debt I had so generously left them, before quietly closing the doors and selling the equipment for pennies on the dollar to pay off their creditors. I never received an apology. I didn't expect one. Some people are so encased in their own entitlement that they can never admit they were wrong. They simply move on to the next thing, leaving a trail of wreckage behind them. But their silence didn't matter. My victory wasn't loud or explosive. It was quiet, it was total, and it was mine. I had built a legacy once with my two hands for my family. When they tried to steal it, I simply built it again, but this time I built it for myself. For a long time, I thought my legacy was the business, the building, the brand. I thought it was something I could pass on like a house or a piece of jewelry, but I was wrong. The betrayal taught me a painful but powerful lesson. A legacy isn't what you leave for people, it's what you leave in people. It's the memory of a taste, the feeling of comfort, the respect you earn through your own integrity and hard work. My daughter and granddaughter could steal the company, but they couldn't steal my skill. They couldn't steal my name, they couldn't steal my soul. That always belonged to me. I am 78 years old and I am starting over, and I have never felt more free.